A good Erev Shabbat. I'd like to tell you a story. Selma Rosenberg grew up in Philadelphia in the 1920s. I heard a fantastic story about her, and the names that I'm using are accurate, and I wouldn't have believed the story if I hadn't verified the details myself. Selma grew up in the Jewish neighborhood in Philly, got married, together with her husband, built a family in the suburbs of Philly, in North Philly. She was active in Hadassah and their local synagogue. And as they aged, their son moved to a small town I have never heard of before, called Peru, Illinois. Peru, Illinois is a small town quite far from Chicago in the state of Illinois. After Selma's husband passed away, she went to live in an assisted living in Peru. She's schmoozing with an old friend. By now, Selma is already 95, and they're talking by phone. And she tells her friend, "You know, it's been a long time since I've seen a rabbi. I'd love to see a rabbi one day." After they hung up, her friend calls up Selma's niece, Naomi, and tells her about the conversation, about the interesting request, how she had never seen a rabbi and she would love to see a rabbi. Well, Naomi did what anybody would probably do in this situation, goes onto Chabad.org, searches Chabad in Peru, Illinois, and the closest one was 60 miles away in another town called Normal, Illinois, which is home to Illinois State University and is led by the directorship of Rabbi Chaim Telzner. Naomi calls Rabbi Telzner and says that her aunt would love to be visited by a rabbi. Is there any chance he might be able to go visit her? Rabbi Chaim takes down her mother's number and calls and calls and calls, tries to get through to her at the assisted living. But alas, after a couple weeks of trying to get through to her and to schedule a visit, he couldn't get through. One day, it's Erev Shabbat, it's Friday just like today, and they're busy getting ready for Shabbat, and it bothered him that he hadn't been able to connect with this Jewish woman, and he tells his wife that he would like to go take that trip out and be back before Shabbat. She gave him a freshly baked challah to share with Selma if he manages to meet her. He travels the 60 miles to Peru, Illinois. He walks into the lobby, and he spots her. A woman from across the room. Her jaw drops, and she says, "Rabbi! I haven't seen a rabbi in so long." They get together, they schmooze, they spend a lot of time reminiscing about the good old days back in the Jewish neighborhood of Philly. He gives her a challah, and she's filled with emotion. She hasn't seen a challah in so long. He gave her also a pair of candlesticks, but not real candles, one that you use with a little light bulb that she could light under the guidelines of the assisted living. And she's holding these candles with such excitement, and she starts just mumbling the bracha, which came back from old memories. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. And the rabbi promises to come back and visit with his kids next week. That evening, Selma's talking to her son on the phone and tells her son about this rabbi who came to visit. Now, with all due respect, her son thought she might be hallucinating. There's no way a rabbi just stopped in with a challah and candles in Peru, Illinois. Next day, her daughter-in-law, at the instruction of her husband, goes to check in on on Selma. How's she doing? Is everything okay? She's been hallucinating. And Selma goes over the same saga, and she shows her leftover challah and the candlesticks. And her daughter-in-law couldn't disagree anymore. This must have happened. That night, Saturday night, just a short 24 hours after the rabbi had come to visit, Selma Rosenberg passed away in her sleep. A Jew is never alone. This week's Torah portion is called Bamidbar, in the desert. That's where the Jewish people spent the time after the Exodus, 40 years until they got to the land of Israel. They were alone in the desert. We're about to celebrate the holiday of Shavuot this week. Where was the Torah given? Where was the Ten Commandments given? On Mount Sinai, in the middle of the Sinai desert. Why did God give the Torah in the desert? Why is this week's Torah portion about us being in the desert? The Rebbe taught us a lesson, that God was sending a very important message to us, that no matter where life will take us, even if we feel like we're in a spiritual desert, we are so isolated from our heritage, we are never alone. If we have friends who we think might be isolated, God is teaching us a lesson. Make sure that they don't feel alone. Go reach out to them. And if you reach out to them, God will reach out to you. In these unprecedented times, so many of us might feel like we're isolated in the desert. Just like those Jews, the time of the giving of the Torah, we are not alone. God is present with us. And the Torah is coming to us as a gift this week as we celebrate 3,332 years from the very first time. God is together with us in our isolation, celebrating with us, and hopefully very soon we'll be able to celebrate healthily and safely in person. Wishing you a very good, joyous Shabbat and a happy Shavuot.